Hello and welcome to the 2024 Capital Improvement Program Neighborhood Informational Presentation. I'm Andy Radig and I'm joined today by City of Oshkosh Director of Public Works, James Robbie. Thanks for being here, James.
Thank you, Andy. Great to be back in the studio with you and getting this information out to the public again.
Absolutely. Well, we've got a lot to discuss today. And first of all, a little bit of background. What is the purpose of this presentation?
The purpose of this presentation is to provide information to residents, whether they be on one of the streets that's going to have work or, people just want to be informed of what's in the capital improvement program. This is a part of the approval process that we go through. First, it starts with the departments submitting requests to finance and the city manager for projects to be included in the capital improvement program. And then we go through a number of reviews. We've already had one workshop with the Common Council. So this is an opportunity to inform our residents and our property owners of what's in the proposed capital improvement program so that they can provide feedback to the Common Council as the council continues to deliberate and debate this topic before they approve the plan later in August, and then the budget in November.
Okay, and so as you said, it is a proposed capital improvement program at this point.
Yeah, the program itself, the plan is intended to be approved in late August, but the program plan itself won't be set until November when the budgets are approved.
Okay, very good. Well, what kinds of items are included in a capital improvement program?
We've got quite a number of overall project types that we include in the program. The biggest one that everybody always wants to talk about are the street and utility improvements.
Sure.
Because those are the most visual of all the projects. But there are a lot of other projects. Other street projects include asphalt paving, similar to what we did on Washburn and Osborne Street this year. Our stormwater utility, our wastewater utility, and our water utility all have projects going on. Stormwater might be doing either some detention or water quality projects. Wastewater's got a lot of projects going on at the plant, as well as some things out in the collection system. Water utility, again, projects at the plant as well as in the distribution system. But then we've also got our sidewalk programs, traffic improvements, where maybe doing some road striping or signal upgrades. Park improvements, there's always a number of things that the Parks Department is working on upgrading or updating in the park facilities to improve, the service that we provide to all of the residents. Then we've got some of our other property improvements, major equipment. That's where, say for example, a big HVAC project for a building, that would fall under the major equipment or the property improvements. And then finally, our various tax incremental finance districts will frequently have projects going on as well. Just working on, sometimes it's infrastructure, sometimes it's other upgrades within the boundaries of those projects.
Okay, so it really is a lot more than roads.
It is a lot more than roads, but that's usually what garners the most attention because it's the most visible projects. When you drive around the city, there's a road closed sign, I can't get through. So those are the most visible projects.
Okay, very good. And I know that there's some information online that folks can see in kind of a visual format.
Yeah, actually, right from the city's main homepage under the government tab, about the third or fourth one down, there's a capital improvements program tab, and that'll take you right to the city's capital improvements program webpage. And on there, we've got a number of dashboards, broken down into 5-year increments. I should mention that the capital improvement program that we're going to be getting approved is a 10-year plan, but we're only going to be approving 1 year's worth of the budget, so 2024. But this is a 10-year plan, so the dashboard has to be broken into 2 sections. One dashboard for the first 5 years worth of projects, and then a second dashboard for the second 5 years worth of projects. So it really gives property owners and residents an idea of, hey, I can go to these 2 dashboards and I can see as of right now what the city's proposing to do for the next decade. Obviously things change. I think back about 7-8 years ago, we were doing some televising and all of a sudden our televising crew came across something on a pipe. They tried to clean it and jet it, and literally our jetter head fell through the bottom of a sewer pipe. The sewer was that bad. So that particular street went from having never been in a preliminary CIP to we're doing that street next year. So emergencies do come up like that, but generally these dashboards will give you a real good indication of what we're going to be doing for the next 10 years.
Okay, yeah, very good. And I know recently we've had a lot of road construction projects. Different streets have been really transformed from being, pretty bumpy to nice and clean and updated.
Yeah, I think over the last 3 or 4 years, I would say the top 5 streets, I guess you could call it, that I get complaints about, West 9th Avenue, Algoma Boulevard, and Wisconsin Street. Well, those have been the last 3 years worth of major projects. I was joking with some of the engineering division staff when we got Wisconsin Street started this year. It's like, well, I wonder what the next one's going to be, because we finally, we've knocked off those 3. And very quickly, Wagoo Avenue started being asked about. So, as we continue to scroll through this, you'll see that's proposed for 2024 as well. So, it's very transformative. As we look at what we've got on screen, you can see a few pictures from the Algoma Boulevard project from last year, kind of a before and after taken from the same location right in front of Reeve Memorial Union. So as you mentioned, transformative is really a good word for what took place on Algoma Boulevard last year. Moving ahead, I mentioned Wagoo. I've gotten a number of questions in the last probably 4 or 5 months about Wagoo Avenue, in particular from Main Street to Bowen. You'll notice here we're doing Wagoo from Main to Mill. The last 50 feet of Wagoo between Mill and Bowen. We're actually going to pick that up when we do Bowen Street in 2026 or 2027. So that'll get caught with that one as we're looking at maybe making some changes there. But we talk a lot about what street classifications are. There's what we refer to as arterial streets, which those are the big main thoroughfares: 9th Avenue, Witzel, Jackson, Oregon, Main Street, and then kind of that next step down are collector streets. So it's not really a local residential street, but it's not a big 4-lane road or something like that. And the reason streets get broken down that way is a lot of the state and federal funding only applies to those major roads, so the arterials or collectors. So we usually will try to program at least one collector or arterial in almost every year so that we have opportunities to seize for funding. A prime example of that was earlier this year with Washburn and Osborne. Those had federal funding. Wagoo, we weren't able to secure funding, but as you look forward in the 10-year plan, almost every year has one of those streets in it, primarily because of trying to take advantage of those funding opportunities. But the vast majority of streets in the city are local, kind of residential streets. So some of the ones that we're doing this year, Tyler, Arthur, Bauman, Coolidge is under construction right now. Those are all local streets. Looking ahead to next year, we've got a few different groupings here. Cherry Street from New York to Lincoln. You'll notice the theme kind of the last few years we've been doing a lot of work in the university area. Started with Algoma. This year we're doing Lincoln and McKinley. Next year we're doing Cherry. So we got a few more of those streets in the university area that are desperately in need of some work that are going to be coming up in the next several years. Grand Street from Parkway to Irving, again, that's another one of those that probably could have been done a few years ago, but we've had a few other projects that took a little higher priority, and we had some utility things that we wanted to get done in those areas before we got to Grand Street. East 7th Avenue, that's really just a couple hundred feet of 7th Avenue leading into the new Mill on Main development project that's going to be getting under construction soon. So we're just trying to take care of that under one of our projects so the developer doesn't need to try to deal with some of the things that we're very accustomed to dealing with. Moving on to another kind of block of streets on the south side of the river, we've got Iowa Street from 6th to 5th, Michigan Street from 5th to 7th, and 5th Avenue and 7th Avenue from Michigan to Iowa. So, if I had a map on the screen, it would be a perfect box around all of these streets with kind of 6th Avenue running in the middle of it. Okay. This is partially tied to a major storm sewer upgrade project. If you remember back a couple of years, we had a lot of flooding taking place in 9th Street or 9th Avenue just west of Ohio Street. I met with a number of those residents and did some Green Bay television interviews, and that's one of the things we had told those residents. So we got a lot of projects coming that are going to help relieve this. We started by getting the outfall into the Fox River and got that into Iowa Street. Now this year we'll continue Iowa Street to 7th and 7th all the way to Michigan. That's going to be a very large storm sewer again to work on relieving some of that flooding around the South Park area. It's going to take us a few years to work all the way back to South Park, just like it's taken us 5 years to work our way down Oregon Street for the sanitary sewer. But this is the next stage of that, and we're doing a number of other street reconstruction projects while we're in the area.
Okay, and a lot of times folks will see the work that is on the surface with these projects, the road is being redone and so forth, but they might not realize that there's a lot of infrastructure that's underneath that road, and sometimes that might even be the impetus for doing the whole project itself.
You're right, it is. There are a lot of times where, if you just look at the street surface, we've got asked a number of times, well, why is this street getting done? There are streets that are in worse condition. But the reality of the matter is, for a long time, the city, when we did paving projects, this is going back 30 plus years, the utilities weren't done. So now we've got concrete pavement over 70 to 100-year-old utilities. Well, now those utilities are, 90 to 120 years old, and they're failing. So there are times where, maybe if you look at the street surface, you're like, this street really doesn't need it, but the utilities are just gone underneath it. Sometimes we can do projects like this year we've got a sanitary sewer lining project where, the sewer needs something done, but the water and storm are okay, the street surface is okay. All right, let's get a rehab, a lining project going on just to extend the life so we don't need to do a full reconstruct. It's a very cost-effective way of extending the life when only one of the utilities is necessary.
Sure.
So we do look at all of those things as we're trying to figure out which pieces of the puzzle or which streets we're going to try to work on, because it really is a gigantic jigsaw puzzle that we're trying to balance.
Oh, sure. Yeah, and with those projects too, you're trying to evaluate all those pieces of the puzzle, so to speak. When you evaluate which projects to do, and I would imagine that sometimes, like a side effect might be improved drainage and stormwater control in areas as well.
Yeah, one of the things that we started doing probably 15 years ago now is doing very detailed stormwater modeling of the watersheds when we're doing street reconstruction projects. Prior to that, the computer technology just wasn't there to effectively model the system. So we're using, older equations that, quite frankly, we learned in college and were very comfortable and did a good job. But with the changes that we're seeing in rainfall intensities and durations, the computer models have really become the best way to evaluate that storm sewer system, because we can take some of the most up-to-date rainfall data that's out there, and we model all of those storm sewers to make sure that what we're putting in is the right size both now and into the future for that street.
Okay, very good. Well, and then as far as how these projects progress, you work with contractors, and they're doing various tasks in order to prepare for the projects.
Right. So some of the things that are going on right now are, the city just sent out notification letters to people on all of these streets. And we've also just hired some contractors to start doing soil borings. So they'll be out there with a drill rig, drilling holes in the road and taking soil samples and getting those tested. And that's really for a number of things. One, we're trying to see what the soil conditions are underground so that we can determine if we need to do anything special to stabilize the soil while we're doing the project. But two, we're also coupling that with our environmental review to see if we're going to encounter any contamination. Unforeseen contamination of soil and groundwater is one of the most expensive change order type of projects that we can encounter. So we do a very in-depth environmental review before a project, and then our geotechnical soil borings. If we think there might be something in an area, we're putting soil borings right there so we can try to get a sample of it and get it tested. We're also working with a contractor to be televising our storm and sanitary sewers, and including the laterals, which is why we ask for construction access agreements, so we can televise up those laterals because some of the old parts of the city, there was a lateral connection just put in, every 30, 40, 50 feet of the main, and maybe only a third of them are active and connected to a house. Well, we want to know that before we start our reconstruction project, because if we don't need to add that many connections or T's in the main stays that much more solid and watertight. So that's why we do so much televising work up front. I mentioned the construction access agreements. That's an agreement between the city and the property owner, allowing us to, do the televising, and ultimately when we're reconstructing, replacing sidewalk, do a little bit of work, onto their property as we're trying to set forms for the sidewalk or get the laterals extended onto their property. So if they do want to replace them later, they don't have to dig into the right of way, and that's a big cost savings for them in the future, because their contractor doesn't have to open up the right of way, doesn't have to get a second round of permits, to work in the right of way. So that's a pretty big step for streamlining those projects.
Okay. And then we do have some utility projects that are proposed.
Yeah, I mentioned earlier, the Oregon Street project. Next year will be year 6. We're not doing anything on Oregon this year, but we'll finally be finishing up that interceptor project, getting it all the way from 35th Avenue to Ripple Avenue. We started, if you remember, back in 2018 at 8th and Oregon, and we've been slowly chugging along to the south ever since. One thing to note, that this sewer project will be done in conjunction with the reconstruction of County Trunk Highway I, which is Oregon Street. So that construction project will be getting managed by the Wisconsin Department of Transportation, because that's the same program like Washburn and Osborne. It uses the same funding source, so the DOT has to manage that project.
Okay.
And then we've also got a water main replacement project on Prospect Avenue from Elmwood to Cherry. So we mentioned earlier we're doing Cherry Avenue full reconstruct. This water main ties into that, so those will be kind of bid as a single construction project, so one contractor will be working on all of that. And then moving along to some non-utility replacement, but some new utility projects. We'll be expanding with the recent attachments from the town of Algoma. We've got some areas that came into the city now that do not have sewer and water yet. So we'll be extending sewer and water mains down Linden Oaks to Meadowbrook Drive, and along Meadowbrook Drive from Linden Oaks to the east end of the streets. And then also on 9th Avenue from where we left off a couple of years ago, extending out to Clairville Road, with future projects planned to go south down Clairville Road. So trying to get city utility services available in those areas, so that then there's a lot of land that's available for development, but right now without services it's difficult to do that. So we're trying to do our part to get the utility services there, so that development can occur.
Sure. This is really all tied together. Development relies on the utilities being present, and without those things, you can't progress further. So it leads to better housing, more housing, other options.
Yeah, it ties into some of those kind of critical components that we've been talking about with the Common Council, with the housing study, our strategic plan. Having that utility infrastructure available just helps make those projects happen. Because to ask a developer to try to do that when they're not, being able to recover the cost for those parts, it can kill a project. When as a utility, we have a responsibility to get that service to them so that they can develop on their properties then.
Okay. Well, another aspect is for properties that are in existence now, and not the new ones necessarily, but for the existing ones, we want to maintain the infrastructure and keep things safe and create improvements for those existing properties. And one of those things is that we are encouraging folks to have their service lines inspected to see if they are lead lines or what type of line is coming into their home.
Yeah, we've had a lead service line replacement program. It's a water service. That's been in place for about 5 years now. We've been taking advantage of state and federal funding to help offset the costs to private property owners to replace lead services if they have them. You mentioned the lead service inspection program. We've got an informational campaign underway right now, trying to get people to sign up for those inspections, because from a regulatory standpoint, we need to have a database of all of our services available, public facing, by about October of next year. So we've got to inspect 10, 11, 12,000 properties to see what their water service material is. And that's why we're trying to get people to sign up for those inspections. And it really does lead to, if they do find they have a lead water service, a number of ways that they can replace it. For example, on any of our utility projects, if we're replacing the public side, per municipal code, the property owner has to replace the private side within 180 days. The same thing if the property owner decides they're going to replace theirs just because they, maybe they want to sell their house in a couple of years and they don't want that as a detriment to trying to sell their house. Once they replace their side, if our side is still lead, we also only have 180 days to get our side replaced. Okay. So that works both ways, whether either party replaces their service. Over the last 5 years, we've had cost sharing available through the programs through the Department of Natural Resources. Our most recent program ended in July, and we've applied for funding for the next 2 years. The DNR is still reviewing those applications. They did come back and ask us a couple of clarifying questions on our application, so we know they are reviewing them. We're hopeful to get more information from the Department of Natural Resources here in the coming months. So again, if people have any questions about the lead service line replacement program, Jody St. Charles is our staff member who is in charge of that program and will be communicating with people. But there's also a lot of information that can be found on the Water Utilities webpage.
Okay, very good. And then also, I know that when a construction project is happening in a neighborhood and maybe it's utility work or the road is ripped up essentially, there are some challenges with all of that. And I know that you work with the local residents and helping them to navigate that.
Yeah, obviously anytime your street's torn up in front of your house, it's difficult. Access is one of the biggest challenges and biggest questions that we get throughout a project. One of the first things, hey, how's my garbage going to get picked up? Well, we work with the sanitation division, and they will adjust their routes to make sure they hit those construction projects first thing in the morning, right at 7 o'clock. And our contractor is required to help the sanitation division get those cans collected. So we've had several of our contractors where, if the sanitation truck can't get down the street, the contractor stops what they're doing and has all their employees lug all the cans down to the end of the street so sanitation can pick them up and then they take them all back. Okay. So we try to make it as easy as possible for the residents. But there's also times where, you're not going to be able to get into your driveway. During concrete paving projects, when we're having to place concrete pavement, it's typically about a 6-week window where you're not going to be able to get into your driveway. The reason for that, once the pavement is all out, the street is excavated, that gravel base is a good 8 to 12 inches lower than it normally would be for the street surface. So it's very difficult to get in and out. And then once you place the concrete, you pave one side of the street. Well, now it's got to wait 7 days to cure before you can pave the other side of the street. So it's just kind of an iterative process. Pave, wait, reset, pave, and then they have to go back and do the sidewalks and the driveway aprons. So it's about a 6-week window where you're probably going to have to be parking on a neighboring street. Access will always be maintained to businesses. Ideally, if a business has 2 driveways, one will be closed, the other will be open and flip-flop. But if they do only have one driveway, our contractor has to figure out a way to pave the street and keep access into those businesses. Sometimes we have to relax parking restrictions on neighboring streets to accommodate the construction project. We do that. We take that through to Common Council. So that's where we rely on a lot of our communication with those residents so they can let us know when things are going on. Another one of the important things too with the communication is if there's any special needs or disabled residents living in an area, we try to make sure that they have parking much closer than everybody else because it is such an access challenge. But if you or one of your neighbors, has issues, please make sure you reach out to the engineering division so that we can get that written right into our contract documents. Another thing, there's a lot of parts of the city that still have what we refer to as rural type mailboxes. So the mailbox is out at the street instead of on the front of the house. So postal service, if your mailbox is on your house, that's not going to be affected. But if you have one of those rural type mailboxes, it's going to probably require some temporary relocation. And the contractor will be working with property owners and the U.S. Postal Service to make sure that people can still get their mail during a construction project.
Okay. And then also just a side note on this, that there are email construction updates available for residents if they happen to be in one of these areas where a project is happening, and they're able to receive regular updates on the status of it.
Yeah, thank you for bringing that up, Andy. We don't have the project list created for next year yet, but we will be soon. But that is something residents can sign up for, and our project engineers send out a weekly update. Okay, here's where we're at. Here's what we're going to be working on next week. Here's what some of the restrictions are, and who is working. Our contractor might not be working, but maybe WPS has a contractor working on their gas main, or they're working on telephone poles, or they've moved the poles, but now they're waiting for AT&T or Spectrum or somebody else who's on the pole to get in and move. So our project engineers will take the information from their weekly progress meetings and send that out via that email distribution list. We are going to be working on revamping that whole arrangement a little bit next year, but it's still going to have a sign up, and you can sign up for whichever projects or however many projects you want to get updates on.
Sure, excellent. It's a great resource. Yeah,
a good quick way to get information.
Right. Well, I know there's also been a lot of discussion about special assessments and funding mechanisms and all that sort of thing, but I guess if you could give us some information about the system that's currently in place and how that works.
Yeah, that's probably, if not the most asked question, the second most asked question. It's usually, what's this going to cost me and how am I going to get to my house? Those are kind of the two big questions. As you mentioned, the setup of the process is something that we've been working with the Common Council for a number of years to try to find some alternatives to. We just had a very spirited discussion over the last couple of months with council, and we're looking at some additional information to provide that they've asked us for. But as for how the policy is currently as of this day, we have a policy in place that's available on the Department of Public Works webpage. We won't set any rates until around December or January. But one of the things that we do always like to make sure people have as kind of a point of reference is, okay, what are this year's rates? And that'll kind of give you a ballpark estimate of where you might be looking at, obviously depending on any policy changes. So as we look at the pavement side of it, there are a number of different categories, and if a street falls in between there, we just kind of average between them. So there's residential, 32 foot wide. That's your typical residential street width, is 32 feet. A 36 foot wide street, that's our typical kind of collector, so that second tier up, that's our typical street width for those. So looking at the residential, the 32-foot residential rate this year is $124 per foot of frontage. So if you have a 50-foot lot, it would be 50 feet times that rate to figure out what the pavement assessment would be. And then there's a number of non-residential categories, and going all the way up to 48 feet wide, which is typically what a lot of our arterial streets are, because they're 4-lane roads. 4 12-foot lanes is 48 feet in width. But it's not just the paving that has assessment costs. It's also the other things, whether it's sanitary sewer laterals or water service. Well, water services are typically the city is only replacing the city side, not the private side. So there's not a lot of cost unless we're putting a new one in. But every property, if they don't already have a storm sewer lateral, will be getting one. If they do already have one, it might be getting relayed depending on what the condition or needs are. But you can see on screen a number of some of these other costs. So sidewalk rehabilitation, similar to our sidewalk rehab program, if it meets the definitions of what requires rehab, that gets passed along to the property owner. If there's only 1 square left but it doesn't require replacement, we're often going to just remove it and replace it at our cost, because it makes the project go that much smoother and actually reduces overall project costs. And then driveway aprons will all get replaced as well. So there's a number of other special assessment costs, if you will, that kind of go into the overall project cost.
Okay. A lot of elements involved with it all, really.
Right.
Yep. Okay. Well, then also, I know that you mentioned that the council has already had a preliminary workshop taking a look at some of these items. What are we looking at for the continued process with this evaluation of everything?
Yeah, we mentioned, on June 28th, Common Council had their first workshop. We talked a lot about the capital improvement program. In fact, that was really the heart of that workshop. Looking ahead, the Plan Commission will be discussing the Capital Improvement Program plan at their August 1st meeting, which is televised here by Oshkosh Media. And then, as we mentioned before, the Capital Improvement Program plan approval by the Common Council will be at the second meeting in August, or August 22nd. And then moving ahead beyond that, the budget hearing will be November 7th, and then the budget approval November 14th at the Common Council meeting. So that's really kind of the last stage. There are very few edits that take place between the approval of the plan and the approval of the budget, but there are things that might come up that require us to make some updates to the plan before the budget gets approved. So the final approval is at that budget approval on November 14th.
Okay. And then as this process moves along, how can folks contact your department or get more information about the background of all of this if they need it?
A number of different ways. Certainly calling our office. The engineering division is their main office number, or as you can see on screen, got my contact information. Steve Godey, the assistant director, and Justin Gierach, the city engineering division manager. All three of us are very well versed in what's going on in the capital improvement program. People can also email the Department of Public Works email address, which is just literally dpw@ci.oshkosh.wi.us, and all three of us plus our administrative assistant all have access to that email. So even if one of us is gone, others of us see that email and can respond to any questions accordingly.
Okay. Any final thoughts that you'd have for us today?
I think the biggest thing is this is trying to spread the word about what projects are coming up. I think one of the key factors is all of this information will be on the Capital Improvement Program page of the city's website. So right there under the government tab, you can click on that, and capital improvements is like the third or fourth line down. Click on that, it'll take you right to the CIP page. All of the dashboards will be there. There'll be links to the proposed plans, and you can see last year's, the current year stuff, 23, those dashboards and information will also be out there. That's where we like to keep all of that information, so people have, kind of one place to go look for capital improvement stuff.
Okay, very good. Well, James, thank you very much for sharing this wealth of information with us today. It's a lot to absorb, but folks can look at the website and learn more.
It really is. There is a lot here, Andy, and I appreciate you taking the time to help us get this recorded and get this information available. As we mentioned, this is just one step in the process, but we want to make sure that people have access to the information so they can understand, what things we're planning on working on for the next years.
Excellent. Well, thanks again for being here.
Thank you, Andy.
And again, if residents would like more information about these programs and other things relating to the Oshkosh Public Works Department, please visit the city's website, www.ci.oshkosh.wi.us. Thanks for watching today, and have a good day.